The text message that destroyed my marriage arrived at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, right as I was debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code. I want a divorce. All communication goes through my lawyer. No explanation, no discussion, just Sarah's nuclear option delivered via iPhone. I stared at the screen for exactly 30 seconds, then did what any rational software architect would do. I systematically began dismantling her entire world. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Jack Morrison, and I'm about to tell you how my wife's betrayal turned me from a mild-mannered tech worker into something far more dangerous. But first, let me explain how we got here. Sarah and I had been married for 8 years, living in our pristine Bellevue home with its smart locks, automated lighting, and security cameras that I'd installed myself. She worked as a marketing executive at Pinnacle Solutions, climbing the corporate ladder with the determination of someone who viewed success as a zero-sum game. I worked remotely, designing software architecture for various tech companies, which gave me plenty of time to notice when things started going wrong. The signs were subtle at first. Sarah's phone became permanently glued to her hand, screen down on every surface. She started working late more frequently, attending client dinners that stretched past midnight. Her perfume changed, something expensive and unfamiliar that lingered in our bedroom. The final straw was finding a lipstick-stained wine glass in her car, along with the distinct scent of men's cologne that definitely wasn't mine. "Working late again tonight," she announced one evening, not even looking up from her phone as she grabbed her keys. "Third time this week," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Must be a big project." She paused at the door, and for a moment I thought she might actually explain. Instead, she just shrugged. "You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was because Sarah had stopped telling me anything months ago. The breaking point came when I overheard her whispering to Maya, her best friend and fellow gossip enthusiast, during one of their weekend coffee sessions in our kitchen. "If Jack finds out, you'll lose everything," Maya hissed, her voice barely audible over the espresso machine. "He won't," Sarah replied with cold certainty. "He's too trusting, too comfortable. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." I stood frozen in the hallway, my blood turning to ice water. Whatever Sarah was planning, it wasn't going to end well for me. That's when I started paying closer attention. I installed keyloggers on our shared computer, set up monitoring software on our router, and began documenting everything. Call it paranoia or preparation. Either way, it saved my life. The evidence painted a picture I'd been too blind to see. Sarah was having an affair with Eliot Brennan, her VP at Pinnacle Solutions, a 40-year-old divorced narcissist who drove a silver Porsche and spent more on gym memberships than most people made in a month. Their text exchanges read like a bad romance novel, complete with explicit photos and detailed plans for their future together, a future that conspicuously didn't include me. But the affair was just the beginning. Sarah and Eliot had been systematically moving money out of our joint accounts, setting up separate investment portfolios, and preparing to leave me with nothing but debt and legal bills. They'd even discussed having me declared mentally incompetent, using my obsessive work habits and social isolation as evidence. "Jack's so predictable," Sarah had texted Eliot. "He'll probably just curl up in his office and code his way through the depression. By the time he hires a lawyer, we'll be in the Caymans." That's when she sent the divorce text. Clean, simple, devastating. She probably expected me to fall apart, maybe beg for another chance or at least ask why. Instead, I did what I do best. I started solving problems. The first problem was Sarah's access to our assets. Within an hour of receiving her text, I'd frozen all joint accounts, canceled her credit cards, and transferred our savings to a personal account she couldn't touch. I also canceled her company credit card, a small oversight on their part, since I was listed as the account administrator for her corporate benefits. My phone started ringing 20 minutes later. "Jack, What the hell did you do? Sarah's voice was shrill, panicked. My cards aren't working. I got your message, I replied calmly. Since you want all communication to go through lawyers, you should probably call yours. I'm sure they'll explain how asset protection works during divorce proceedings. You can't just... I hung up and blocked her number. If she wanted to play hardball, I'd show her what a real game looked like. The next call came from Maya, trying to play peacemaker. Jack, Sarah is stuck at the spa with no way to pay. This is ridiculous. You're being petty. I'm being practical, I corrected. Sarah made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences. She just needs some space to figure things out. Maya, let me save you some time. I know about Eliot. I know about the money transfers. I know about their little plan to leave me broken. So if you're calling to play dumb, don't bother. If you're calling to apologize for helping my wife destroy our marriage, I'm listening. The silence stretched for 10 seconds before Maya hung up. That evening, I sat in my home office surrounded by 3 monitors displaying bank records, email logs, and security footage. Sarah's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was comprehensive, calculated, and cruel. She'd spent months planning my destruction while lying to my face every single day. But Sarah had made one critical error. She'd assumed I was weak. I wasn't weak. I was just getting started. The next morning brought a frantic call from Sarah's lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman named Patricia Winters who specialized in high-asset divorces. Mr. Morrison, your actions yesterday were legally questionable and practically vindictive. We need to discuss immediate restoration of your wife's access to marital assets. Ms. Winters, I replied, settling back in my desk chair. I'm sure you're very good at intimidating confused husbands, but I'm not confused. I know exactly what your client was planning, and I have documentation. Would you like me to email you the highlights, or should we save it for court? Another silence. Lawyers hate surprises, especially when they realize their client hasn't been entirely truthful. What kind of documentation? She asked carefully. The kind that shows systematic asset transfer, adultery with detailed evidence, and conspiracy to defraud. The kind that turns a simple divorce into a very expensive mistake for everyone involved except me. I'll call you back. She didn't call back that day, or the next. Meanwhile, I'd started my own investigation. Sarah thought she was clever, but she'd forgotten that I designed security systems for a living. Our home network captured everything, every website visit, every email, every cloud backup. Her phone automatically synced to our shared storage, which meant I had access to months of deleted messages, photos, and call logs. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd imagined. Sarah and Eliot hadn't just been planning to leave me broke. They'd been actively sabotaging my professional relationships, spreading rumors about my mental health and work reliability. Sarah had contacted 3 of my biggest clients, suggesting they might want to diversify their technical resources because I was going through some personal issues that were affecting my judgment. 2 of those clients had already started shopping for new architects. But the most damaging discovery was a recorded phone conversation between Sarah and Eliot, discussing their timeline for my complete destruction. The key is making him look unstable, Eliot had said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. If we can establish a pattern of erratic behavior, we can contest any financial arrangements he tries to make. Maybe even get him committed for evaluation. He's already isolated, Sarah had replied. No real friends, just work acquaintances. His own mother thinks he's obsessive. It won't be hard to paint him as unhinged. What about his business? Those contracts are worth serious money. I've been working on that, planting seeds with his clients, making them question his stability. Once his reputation is shot, the money will dry up fast. They'd laughed about it, actually laughed about destroying my life for their convenience. That's when I decided that simply protecting myself wasn't enough. Sarah wanted to play psychological warfare? Fine. But she was about to learn the difference between amateur manipulation and professional-grade revenge. My first move was subtle. I created anonymous social media accounts and began documenting Sarah and Eliot's affair in real time. Photos of them entering hotels together, screenshots of their text exchanges, timestamps of their meetings. Nothing illegal, just truth, presented without context or explanation. The photos started appearing on local gossip blogs and community Facebook pages. Pinnacle Solutions executives caught in steamy affair. Married marketing exec's secret romance exposed. The posts went viral within hours, shared by hundreds of people who loved nothing more than watching successful people fall from grace. Sarah's phone started ringing constantly. Friends, colleagues, even her mother, all wanting to know if the rumors were true. She tried calling me, forgetting I'd blocked her number. Then she tried showing up at the house. I watched through the security cameras as she pounded on the front door, her face twisted with rage and panic. The smart doorbell recorded everything, including her screaming threats about what she'd do if I didn't fix this mess immediately. I saved the video for later use. The next phase involved Eliot directly. I'd done my research on Sarah's lover, and the man was even more pathetic than I'd initially thought. Divorced twice, both times for cheating. A gym membership at 3 different high-end facilities because he'd been banned from 2 for harassing female members. A Porsche he couldn't actually afford, financed at a predatory interest rate that would make a loan shark blush. Most importantly, Eliot was married again. His third wife, a former model named Victoria, who'd apparently been kept in the dark about his extracurricular activities. I sent Victoria an anonymous package containing printed copies of Eliot's text messages with Sarah, including the explicit photos they'd exchanged. I also included a detailed timeline of their affair, complete with hotel receipts and restaurant charges that Eliot had hidden from his wife. Victoria's response was swift and nuclear. She showed up at Pinnacle Solutions the next day, marching directly into the executive suite with a briefcase full of evidence and a divorce attorney in tow. The screaming match between Victoria and Sarah in the lobby became legendary office gossip, especially when Victoria started reading Eliot's sexts aloud for everyone to hear. "I want to taste every inch of your married body," Victoria had announced in her carrying voice, holding up printed messages. "Your husband is such a pathetic loser. I can't wait to spend his money on you." Really, Sarah? This is what passes for romance in your world? Security had to escort both women out, but not before half the office had recorded the confrontation on their phones. The videos were online within hours, tagged with both women's names and Pinnacle Solutions corporate hashtags. By the end of the week, Sarah had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation of workplace conduct violations. Eliot had been suspended without pay, and I was just getting started. The anonymous USB drive appeared on my doorstep 3 days later, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Inside was a treasure trove of internal Pinnacle Solutions documents, including email chains between Sarah and Eliot that went back over a year. Someone with access to the company's servers had decided to help my cause. The emails revealed the full scope of their conspiracy. Sarah and Eliot hadn't just been planning to destroy my marriage, they'd been systematically undermining other employees, manipulating client relationships, and embezzling company resources for their personal use. They'd charged romantic getaways to corporate accounts, used company time and equipment for personal projects, and even stolen proprietary client lists to start their own competing business. But the most damaging evidence was a series of emails discussing their plans for me specifically. They'd researched my client contracts, identified vulnerabilities in my business relationships, and developed a systematic campaign to destroy my professional reputation. Sarah had been feeding Eliot inside information about my work habits, my client relationships, even my personal insecurities, which he'd then used to craft targeted attacks on my credibility. "Jack's biggest weakness is his need for control," Sarah had written. "He can't handle uncertainty or chaos. If we can create enough professional instability, he'll crack under the pressure." Then we can use his breakdown as evidence of mental incompetence in the divorce proceedings. They'd planned to drive me to a nervous breakdown, then use that breakdown to steal everything I'd worked for. It was sophisticated, cruel, and almost certainly illegal. I spent the next 2 days copying everything onto multiple drives and preparing my response. If Sarah and Eliot wanted to play corporate warfare, I'd show them what a real campaign looked like. My first target was their embezzlement scheme. I compiled a detailed report documenting every misuse of company resources, complete with receipts, timestamps, and email evidence. Then I sent anonymous copies to Pinnacle Solutions' board of directors, their accounting department, and their primary competitors. The response was immediate. Pinnacle's CEO, a no-nonsense woman named Margaret Chen, launched a full internal investigation. Sarah and Eliot were called in for separate interviews. Their company devices were confiscated, and their access to corporate systems was revoked pending the investigation's outcome. But I wasn't done with them yet. My next move targeted their personal reputations directly. I created a comprehensive website documenting their affair, their embezzlement, and their conspiracy against me. The site included screenshots of their text messages, photos of their hotel meetings, copies of their fraudulent expense reports, and audio recordings of their phone conversations discussing my destruction. I called it the Sarah Morrison Files, a case study in corporate betrayal and marital fraud. The website went live on a Friday evening, perfectly timed for weekend social media sharing. I promoted it through targeted ads on Facebook and LinkedIn, focusing on Seattle area professionals, Pinnacle Solutions employees, and Sarah's personal network. Within 48 hours, the site had received over 10,000 visitors and been shared hundreds of times across multiple platforms. Sarah's phone started ringing again, but this time it wasn't friends calling for gossip. It was professional contacts distancing themselves, social acquaintances canceling plans, and family members demanding explanations. Her carefully cultivated image as a successful, ethical businesswoman crumbled in real time as people read the evidence of her true character. The website also caught the attention of local news outlets. An investigative reporter from Kiro 7 reached out, asking if I'd be willing to discuss corporate misconduct and workplace affairs for a segment on business ethics. I declined the interview but provided background information that helped them develop their own story. The news segment aired the following Tuesday, featuring interviews with former Pinnacle Solutions employees who'd been victims of Sarah and Eliot's manipulations. The reporter didn't mention me by name, but the story painted a clear picture of systematic workplace abuse and financial misconduct that aligned perfectly with my website's documentation. Sarah tried to respond with her own public relations campaign, hiring a crisis management firm to correct the record and address false allegations, but her PR team couldn't overcome the weight of evidence I'd compiled. Every statement they released was immediately contradicted by new documentation I'd post online, often within hours of their press releases. The final blow came when Victoria, Eliot's soon-to-be ex-wife, decided to join forces with me. She'd been conducting her own investigation into Eliot's finances and had discovered that he'd been using marital assets to fund his affair with Sarah. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, jewelry, even a weekend trip to Hawaii, all paid for with money that legally belonged to both Victoria and Eliot. Victoria was a former model, but she was also a savvy businesswoman who'd built her own successful consulting firm. She understood public relations, legal strategy, and the value of controlling the narrative. When she decided to go public with Eliot's betrayal, she did it with professional precision. Her press conference was a masterpiece of controlled fury. Standing in front of Pinnacle Solutions' corporate headquarters, flanked by her attorney and a stack of financial documents, Victoria methodically destroyed both Eliot and Sarah's remaining credibility. My husband and his accomplice didn't just betray their marriages, she announced to a crowd of reporters and onlookers. They betrayed their company, their colleagues, and their basic obligations as human beings. The evidence I'm releasing today shows a pattern of fraud, manipulation, and cruelty that extends far beyond a simple extramarital affair. She then released a comprehensive dossier documenting Eliot and Sarah's misconduct, including financial records I'd helped her compile and audio recordings of Eliot discussing their plans to destroy me. The story dominated local news for 3 days and was picked up by national business publications as an example of corporate malfeasance. Sarah called me that evening, somehow managing to get through my call blocking. "You've destroyed everything," she sobbed into the phone. "My career, my reputation, my entire life. Are you happy now?" "I'm just getting started," I replied calmly. "You wanted to play games with my life, Sarah. Now you get to see what happens when someone plays back." "I never meant for it to go this far." "Yes, you did. You planned every detail, documented your intentions, and celebrated my anticipated destruction. The only thing you didn't plan for was me fighting back." "Jack, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling, figure out how to move forward." I laughed, a sound that surprised even me with its coldness. "Sarah, there is no moving forward. There's only consequences, and you haven't seen anything yet." I hung up and got back to work. Phase 3 was about to begin. The beautiful thing about living in a connected world is how quickly information spreads through professional and social networks. Sarah had spent years building relationships based on her carefully crafted image as a successful, ethical businesswoman. Those same relationships became weapons against her once the truth emerged. Maya, Sarah's best friend and co-conspirator, was the first domino to fall. As Pinnacle Solutions' investigation expanded, they discovered that Maya had been helping Sarah manipulate client relationships and had received kickbacks for referring business to Sarah's planned competing venture. Maya was terminated immediately, her employment contract voided for breach of ethics clauses. But Maya's firing had a cascading effect that Sarah hadn't anticipated. Maya's husband worked for one of Sarah's biggest client companies, and when Maya's misconduct became public knowledge, it reflected poorly on his judgment and professional associations. To protect his own career, Maya's husband began distancing himself from anything connected to Sarah, including canceling contracts that his company had with Pinnacle Solutions. The client defections created financial pressure on Pinnacle, which led to more scrutiny of Sarah and Eliot's activities. The deeper the company dug, the more evidence they found of systematic misconduct. What had started as an investigation into workplace affairs had evolved into a comprehensive audit of departmental finances and client relationships. Meanwhile, I'd been working on a more personal level of destruction. Sarah's social circle was built around her professional success and financial status. She belonged to an exclusive gym, attended charity galas, and maintained memberships in several high-end social clubs. All of these relationships were based on the assumption that Sarah was successful, stable, and trustworthy. I systematically destroyed those assumptions. Anonymous emails went out to the membership committees of Sarah's social clubs, detailing her misconduct and including links to the documentation on my website. Her gym membership was revoked when other members complained about the negative publicity. Charity organizations quietly removed her from their donor lists and event planning committees. The social isolation was devastating for someone like Sarah, who derived much of her self-worth from external validation and status symbols. Her Instagram posts, once filled with photos from exclusive events and professional achievements, became increasingly desperate attempts to maintain relevance. The comments sections filled with questions about the allegations, links to news articles, and thinly veiled mockery. But the most effective attack came from an unexpected source: Sarah's own mother. Margaret Morrison was a sharp-tongued woman in her 70s who'd built a successful real estate business through decades of hard work and ethical dealing. She'd always been proud of Sarah's professional success, but she was also old school enough to believe that character mattered more than career advancement. When Margaret learned the full extent of Sarah's misconduct, not just the affair, but the systematic fraud and the planned destruction of her son-in-law, she was furious. "I didn't raise a daughter to be a liar and a cheat," Margaret announced at the weekly family dinner, which Sarah had attended hoping for emotional support. "What you've done to Jack, to your marriage, to your own integrity, it's disgusting." Margaret then did something that devastated Sarah more than any public humiliation could. She cut off all financial support and removed Sarah from her will. Margaret had been planning to help Sarah buy a new house after the divorce, assuming Sarah was the victim of an unhappy marriage. Learning the truth changed everything. "You want to destroy people for money?" Margaret told Sarah. "Fine, but you won't get a penny of mine to do it." Sarah's support network was collapsing from every direction, but I still wasn't satisfied. The woman who'd planned to have me declared mentally incompetent deserved to understand what real powerlessness felt like. My next target was Eliot, whose situation had become increasingly desperate. Victoria's divorce attorney had frozen most of his assets, Pinnacle Solutions had terminated his employment, and his professional reputation was in ruins. But Eliot was the kind of man who blamed everyone except himself for his problems, and he'd decided that I was responsible for his downfall. He started following me. I first noticed him parked outside my house on a Tuesday morning, sitting in his Porsche and talking on his phone. When I left for a client meeting, he followed at a distance, probably thinking he was being subtle. When I stopped for coffee, he parked across the street and watched through the cafe windows. Eliot's surveillance was amateur hour stuff, the kind of obvious stalking that someone does when they're angry and stupid rather than strategic. But it gave me an opportunity to demonstrate the difference between his approach and mine. I led him on a carefully planned route through Seattle, making stops at locations I'd chosen specifically for their security camera coverage. By the time I was done, I had footage of Eliot following me from 12 different angles, including several that clearly showed his license plate and his face. Then I called the police and filed a restraining order. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, giving me time to prepare a comprehensive presentation of Eliot's stalking behavior. I brought printed screenshots of his social media posts about me, copies of threatening text messages he'd sent to my work phone, and security footage showing him parked outside my house on multiple occasions. The judge granted the restraining order immediately and warned Eliot that any further contact would result in criminal charges. But more importantly, the restraining order became part of the public record, which meant it was picked up by the local news outlets that had been following the story. "Disgraced executive stalks victim of corporate fraud scheme," read the headline in the Seattle Times. The article included details about Eliot's termination from Pinnacle Solutions, his divorce proceedings, and his increasingly erratic behavior since his misconduct had been exposed. Eliot's response to the restraining order was predictably stupid. Instead of backing off, he decided to escalate by trying to contact my clients directly, hoping to damage my business relationships the way Sarah had originally planned. But I'd already warned my clients about potential sabotage attempts, and Eliot's approach was so clumsy that it backfired spectacularly. Instead of questioning my professional competence, my clients began asking if I needed additional security support. 2 of them offered to help me pursue legal action against Eliot, and one suggested hiring private investigators to document his harassment campaign. Eliot's amateur hour revenge attempts were actually strengthening my professional relationships and generating sympathy for my situation. He was doing more to help my cause than I could have accomplished on my own. But Sarah was smarter than Eliot, and she'd been watching his failures with growing alarm. She realized that direct confrontation wasn't working and decided to try a different approach: public relations warfare. Sarah hired a crisis management firm and began a coordinated campaign to reframe the narrative around our divorce. She gave interviews to local news outlets, portraying herself as the victim of a vindictive ex-husband's cyber-stalking campaign. She claimed that I'd been psychologically abusive throughout our marriage, and that her affair with Eliot had been an attempt to escape an unhealthy relationship. "Jack seems like a quiet, harmless person," Sarah told a sympathetic reporter. "But behind closed doors, he was controlling and manipulative. He monitored my communications, isolated me from friends, and made me feel like I was walking on eggshells constantly. It was a clever strategy, designed to exploit common assumptions about domestic abuse and redirect attention away from her documented misconduct. Sarah was betting that people would be more sympathetic to a story about psychological abuse than they would be interested in the details of corporate fraud. But Sarah had made a critical error. She'd forgotten that I had recordings of our private conversations going back months. Sarah's media campaign lasted exactly 4 days before I destroyed it completely. Her first mistake was giving specific examples of my alleged controlling and manipulative behavior. She claimed that I'd monitored her phone calls, restricted her access to money, and threatened her when she tried to maintain friendships. These were serious allegations that, if true, would have painted me as an abuser and her as a victim. Unfortunately for Sarah, I had audio recordings of our actual conversations about these topics, including several where she explicitly acknowledged that I'd never restricted her activities or monitored her communications without cause. "Jack, I know you're not trying to control me," Sarah had said in one recorded conversation from 3 months earlier. "I appreciate that you trust me to handle my own business relationships and social life. Some of my friends have husbands who are much more possessive." In another recording, Sarah had actually thanked me for giving her complete access to our financial accounts and for not questioning her spending decisions, even when those decisions included expensive purchases she'd made without consulting me. "I love that we have such an equal partnership," she'd told me. "You never make me feel like I have to justify my choices or ask permission for things. It's so different from how my parents' marriage worked." I released these recordings through my website, along with a detailed timeline showing the dates of Sarah's media interviews compared to the dates of our recorded conversations. The contradiction was devastating. Sarah was publicly claiming abuse while privately acknowledging the opposite. But the recordings also revealed something else that destroyed Sarah's credibility permanently: her own voice discussing the plan to have me declared mentally incompetent. "The key is building a pattern of documentation," Sarah had told Eliot in one recorded phone call. "If I can establish that Jack is obsessive, paranoid, and socially isolated, we can use that in court. Maybe even get him committed for evaluation if he fights the divorce terms." "What about his business?" Eliot had asked. "Those contracts are worth serious money." "I've been working on that too. Planting seeds with his clients, making them question his stability. Once his reputation is shot, the money will dry up fast." They'd laughed about it. Actually laughed about their plan to destroy my mental health, my professional reputation, and my financial security for their personal benefit. When these recordings went public, Sarah's media strategy collapsed overnight. The same reporters who'd been sympathetic to her abuse claims were now asking hard questions about her documented conspiracy to commit fraud and harassment. The crisis management firm she'd hired quietly terminated their contract, not wanting to be associated with such obvious misconduct. But Sarah wasn't ready to surrender. If anything, the exposure of her media manipulation seemed to push her toward more desperate measures. She began reaching out to my professional contacts directly, not to sabotage my business as originally planned, but to warn them about my dangerous mental state and escalating behavior. "Jack has become obsessed with destroying me," she told one of my longtime clients. "He's created websites, hired investigators, and made threats against my safety. I'm genuinely afraid of what he might do next." It was a smart approach that might have worked against someone else. Sarah was betting that my clients would be concerned enough about potential liability to distance themselves from me, even if they didn't believe her allegations completely. But Sarah had forgotten something important. I'd been working with these clients for years, and they knew my character and professional competence intimately. When Sarah started making wild claims about my mental state, my clients didn't panic. They got curious. "Jack," one of them called to ask, "your ex-wife contacted me with some pretty serious allegations about stalking and harassment. I know you're going through a divorce, but I wanted to hear your side of things." I'd been preparing for this conversation for weeks. Instead of getting defensive or angry, I simply provided documentation. I sent my client copies of the court records showing that Eliot had been stalking me, not the other way around. I shared the audio recordings of Sarah discussing her plan to destroy my business. I provided links to the news articles documenting Sarah and Eliot's corporate misconduct. "Jesus Christ, Jack," my client said after reviewing the evidence. "This isn't a divorce. It's a criminal conspiracy. Why haven't you gone to the police?" "Because I don't need the police," I replied. "I need them to destroy themselves, which they're doing quite effectively." My client not only renewed our contract, but referred me to 2 additional companies that needed architecture consulting. Word spread through the tech community about Sarah's harassment campaign, but instead of damaging my reputation, it generated sympathy and support for my situation. Meanwhile, the investigation at Pinnacle Solutions had expanded into a full corporate audit. The company had discovered that Sarah and Eliot's misconduct was part of a larger pattern of financial irregularities in their department. Several other employees had been terminated, multiple client contracts were under review, and the company was facing potential lawsuits from clients who'd been overcharged or underserved. Pinnacle's board of directors was furious. The company's stock price had dropped 12% since the scandal broke, and several major clients had terminated their contracts rather than be associated with the negative publicity. Sarah and Eliot's affair had cost the company millions of dollars in lost revenue and legal exposure. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source: the IRS. Eliot's financial desperation had led him to make increasingly stupid decisions about hiding assets from Victoria's divorce attorney. He'd been moving money through offshore accounts, claiming business expenses that were actually personal expenditures, and failing to report income from side consulting projects. The IRS doesn't care about marital drama or corporate politics. They care about taxes, and Eliot had been evading them systematically for over 2 years. When Victoria's forensic accountants uncovered Eliot's hidden income streams, they were legally obligated to report the tax evasion to federal authorities. Eliot was arrested on a Tuesday morning, charged with tax evasion and fraud. The arrest was covered by local news outlets, complete with footage of Eliot being led away in handcuffs while reporters shouted questions about his relationship with Sarah and their corporate misconduct. Sarah's response to Eliot's arrest was pure panic. She realized that if Eliot decided to cooperate with federal investigators, he might implicate her in the tax evasion scheme. She began reaching out to former colleagues, trying to distance herself from Eliot and minimize her involvement in their joint activities. But it was too late. The federal investigation had access to all of Pinnacle Solutions' financial records, including the expense reports and client billings that documented Sarah and Eliot's fraudulent activities. Sarah might not have been directly involved in Eliot's tax evasion, but she was clearly complicit in the corporate fraud that had enabled it. The stress was destroying Sarah physically and emotionally. Her social media posts became increasingly erratic, alternating between defiant claims of innocence and desperate pleas for understanding. She'd lost weight, her appearance had deteriorated, and her behavior had become unpredictable. That's when she made her final, fatal mistake. She decided to confront me directly. Sarah appeared at my front door on a Thursday evening, looking like a ghost of her former self. The confident, polished executive I'd married had been replaced by a desperate woman with hollow eyes and trembling hands. She'd been drinking. I could smell the wine on her breath from 6 feet away. "We need to talk," she announced, pushing past me into the house before I could respond. I followed her into the living room, keeping my distance while she paced frantically around the space we'd once shared as a couple. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah had demanded that all communication go through lawyers, but now she was violating her own rule because her carefully planned life was crumbling around her. "You've destroyed everything," she said, spinning to face me with wild eyes. "My career, my reputation, my relationships, everything I worked for is gone because of your vindictive revenge campaign." "I didn't destroy anything, Sarah." I just documented what you'd already done. You manipulated the evidence. You took things out of context, made me look like some kind of criminal mastermind. I released your own words, in your own voice, discussing your plan to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal my assets. Which part of that was taken out of context? Sarah's face crumpled, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I never meant for it to go that far, she whispered. It was just talk, just fantasy. I was angry and hurt, and I said things I didn't mean. You documented the plan in writing, Sarah. You moved money out of our accounts. You contacted my clients to sabotage my business. You recorded conversations about my mental state to use as evidence in court. That's not fantasy. That's systematic fraud. But I didn't go through with it. When I sent that divorce text, I was planning to be fair about the assets. I just wanted out of the marriage. I stared at her, amazed by her capacity for self-deception, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Sarah, you moved $60,000 out of our joint accounts 3 days before you sent that text. You'd already contacted 2 of my biggest clients to plant seeds about my instability. You had meetings scheduled with 3 different divorce attorneys to discuss strategy for maximizing your settlement. The only reason you didn't follow through is because I stopped you. She collapsed onto the couch, her face in her hands. What do you want from me, Jack? What will it take for you to stop this campaign and let me rebuild my life? It was a reasonable question, and one I'd been asking myself for weeks. What did I want? Justice? Revenge? Simple protection from further attacks? All of the above? I want you to understand consequences, I said finally. For 8 years, you lived in a world where your actions didn't have real repercussions. You could lie, cheat, manipulate, and betray people without facing any meaningful punishment. But actions have consequences, Sarah. Always. I'm facing consequences. I've lost my job, my friends, my reputation. You've lost those things because you earned that loss through your choices. The same way I would have lost my business, my assets, and my mental health if your plan had succeeded. Sarah looked up at me with something approaching clarity for the first time in months. You're never going to forgive me, are you? Forgiveness isn't the issue, I replied. Trust is. You spent months planning my destruction while lying to my face every single day. You conspired with your lover to have me declared mentally incompetent. You tried to steal everything I'd worked for and leave me broken and alone. That's not a mistake, Sarah. That's who you are. She nodded slowly, as if finally accepting a truth she'd been avoiding. Then she stood up and walked toward the door, moving with the careful precision of someone who's had too much to drink. I'm going to disappear for a while, she said without turning around. Leave Seattle, maybe leave the country. Start over somewhere else where people don't know about all this. That's probably wise, I agreed. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. Do you think you'll ever be able to move on from this? Find someone else? Be happy again? It was an oddly thoughtful question from someone who'd spent months trying to destroy my capacity for happiness. I think I'll be fine, I said. I've learned a lot about myself over the past few months. Turns out I'm much stronger than either of us thought. Sarah left without another word, and I watched through the security cameras as she drove away in her rental car. I never saw her again. The next morning brought news that Eliot had agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony would likely implicate several other Pinnacle Solutions employees in the fraud scheme, but Sarah wasn't among them. She'd been careful to maintain plausible deniability about the corporate misconduct, even while planning personal betrayal. But Eliot's cooperation came with an unexpected bonus. He provided investigators with detailed records of his financial relationship with Sarah, including documentation of their plan to start a competing business using stolen client lists and proprietary information. While Sarah might avoid criminal charges for the corporate fraud, She was now facing potential civil lawsuits from Pinnacle Solutions and their clients. The legal exposure would follow her wherever she went, making it nearly impossible for her to work in marketing or business development ever again. She'd effectively been blacklisted from her chosen profession by her own documented misconduct. 3 weeks later, I received divorce papers from a new attorney, Sarah's fourth lawyer since the process began. The settlement terms were exactly what I demanded from the beginning. Sarah would receive nothing from our marriage except her personal belongings and her car. All assets, including the house, would remain with me. Sarah would also be responsible for her own legal fees and any outstanding debts incurred during her affair. I signed the papers without hesitation and returned them the same day. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later in a brief court hearing that Sarah didn't attend. The judge reviewed the evidence of her misconduct, confirmed the asset division, and declared our marriage officially terminated. The whole process took less than 15 minutes. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but the calm satisfaction of a job completed successfully. Sarah had tried to destroy me, and I'd not only survived, but thrived. My business was stronger than ever. My reputation had been enhanced by the way I'd handled the crisis, and I'd learned valuable lessons about my own capabilities. That evening, I updated my website one final time. Instead of adding new evidence or documentation, I posted a simple message. This case study is now complete. Sarah Morrison's attempt to destroy her husband through fraud, manipulation, and psychological warfare has been thoroughly documented and defeated. The consequences of her actions will follow her for the rest of her life, as they should. Justice has been served. I closed the laptop and looked around my house now free and clear. Tomorrow, I would start the process of moving forward, maybe even dating again eventually. But tonight, I was content to sit in my office, surrounded by the evidence of my victory, and appreciate the beautiful simplicity of consequences finally catching up with someone who'd spent years avoiding them. Sarah had wanted to play games with my life. I'd shown her what happens when someone plays back, and plays to win. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Nate, my old friend, who'd helped me through the worst of the crisis. "How does it feel to be a free man?" he asked. "Like justice," I replied. "It feels like justice." And for the first time in months, I smiled.